we have seen, and I kid you not, we have seen grown men actually cry tears of joy when they saw the technology work, because they're like, you don't know how many hours, man hours and days and weeks of our lives you've just saved us with what you're transmitting to us, and the ability for us to monitor this now on a computer screen the same way that almost every other business does.
People love to throw around the word revolutionizing, but it really does feel like you're bringing a very long-standing industry sort of into this digital age, which is really, really cool to see. Before we get moving on today's episode, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed on this podcast by either myself, my co-host, or any guests are their personal views and do not represent the views of any associated organization. Nothing in the episode should be construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or any other advice. Okay, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. We are joined by Tzvi here. He's the founder and CEO of Baxus, a wine and spirits trading business that is redefining the way wine and spirits are traded, authenticated, and valued. They recently announced their $5 million seed round led by the good folks over at Multicoin Capital. And that was just a couple weeks ago. So Tzvi, thanks a ton for coming on, man. Super pumped to jam on this. You guys are, just before the show, we jammed on the fact that you're doing RWAs, but before they were cool, and even the cooler version of the financialized RWAs we see today. So I want to jump in, get your background, get your views on the space we're building in. But I think a really helpful jumping off point here is going to be just talking a bit about the brief intro to Baxus, probably, and then what led you to creating it. And then I kind of want to dive in later to the off-chain spirit trading market today, and kind of what parts that you really want to focus in on and improve.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Dan. Background on Baxus and kind of what kicked us off. So I was a professional spirits trader. So I actually started off as a collector, got really into whiskey pretty young, 21, 22, just got really into it and started to realize almost immediately that one, it's a really expensive hobby to get into, especially when you're young and don't really have a job. And so what became really important was finding ways and a community within the whiskey world of being able to try things that I wouldn't otherwise be able to just go and buy. Even a $150, $200 bottle was expensive. So it's what can I find that's good, that I like, that I can appreciate, that doesn't cost that much money. But what that immediately brought me to when I was doing, price comparisons and price shopping was, wait a second, I can find one bottle, over here. I lived in New York City at the time. So I can find a bottle in New York City that's $75 in New York City, but it's $50 in New Jersey. I'm like, okay, so I'll drive out to Jersey, take a little bit of extra time, but that's a pretty good savings. But then when you start to get to the higher level of bottles, I'd find a bottle that was $2,000 in New York City that was $800 in New Jersey, or $650 in Kentucky, or some other state in the U.S., or and let alone when you start looking around the rest of the world. And so what I realized was that there's a real inefficiency in the distribution and pricing and price discovery as it pertains to wines and spirits. And that really was kind of the launching point, and the impetus for getting into Baxus was, well, back then originally whiskey trading was I could buy 2 bottles in Jersey and then sell it to someone, a friend in New York, and end up keeping one for free and basically have one that I could drink and enjoy without having to pay for it. And that really evolved into the idea of, wait a second, I could buy 3 of them or 4 of them or 5 of them and then sell them to people all over the country or all over the world, and actually end up making a profit on it. And so that really started off kind of my early brokering days of, getting into the whiskey space. But the brokering then evolved into more of what I started to notice when I was, tracking trends, keeping track of prices, was that there was actual growth and appreciation, that bottles in particular of whiskey, and one of the things that drew me to it from a collectible perspective was they're actually deflationary. So if they only make 200 bottles of something, and then you have one and I have one and 15 other people have one, every time we open one, there's one less of that bottle in circulation, and they'll never bring it back. They can't bring that identical bottle back. So particularly when they're single cask or a really unique limited release, it makes it something where I'm like, okay, there's a finite number of these, which makes them collectible to begin with. But the fact that, the holy grail of crypto, we're burning more than we're producing. It's well, we're really doing that when it comes to, these limited and special types of wines and spirits. And so that got me into it from the perspective of, this has longer term value. I can hold on to this and have it appreciate over time as more people want it, and there are fewer of them for them to try.
I love that angle there. Yeah, this is a truly efficient burn mechanism here we have. And so I'm curious, like, I feel like in crypto, a lot of the time we see businesses kind of, and you start with like, hey, I want to build something on chain, and then you figure out what the business is. But this feels like the complete opposite. You flipped it on its head where you're like, hey, I want to build this business. Oh, and like building it on chain, like improves some piece of the puzzle here for me. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly what it was. So I was actually a student at the time when I met my co-founder and our CTO, Carrie. She was the head databases TA at Columbia, and I was taking databases courses as a poli-sci student because I was a whiskey trader who wanted to build a whiskey marketplace. It was all about the, hey, this is super inefficient, and there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a way to put this price discovery online so that you could figure out what real fair market value is, and basically scale what I was doing, because brokering is, I'd send out a spreadsheet. 3 weeks later, the same spreadsheet that I sent out would be sent back to me, marked up like 40, 50%, because every broker in the business got their hands on it, changed the title, changed the prices, and they didn't actually hold any of the bottles. And I'm like, okay, this is driving up prices on bottles that, like, there's a real end user and an end consumer, and they're not going to be able to find it. So started digging into databases courses, like, okay, we'll just build this in SQL. But having met Carrie and explained to her what we were trying to build, and then realizing that, like, wait, we could build this together and build this as an actual company, not just as a little service that like augments off of what I was already doing, but into a full-on marketplace platform that creates that transparency, creates that trust, and that that level of transparency. That really is what kicked it off. And so crypto was something originally that we had looked at, and I was at a vague understanding, I would say at the very beginning of blockchain. Carrie was really the whiz over there who really understood kind of its capabilities. And what we realized is that provided a digital title and proof of ownership, like real proof of ownership of something that is, in this case, custodial. So we hold the physical bottles because we need to make sure that they're authentic. We need to make sure that they're real, they're secure, they're insured, and they're being stored properly. But it also created this new access for capital formation and for liquidity. And that was the really most exciting part, was that we weren't going after the crypto community and saying, hey, we're going to try and sell you something new. We actually were like, no. The most blockchain, least crypto we could do with this at the beginning is the better. So it was actually really hard for us at the beginning because all of the infrastructure was geared around, we were going to mint these bottles effectively as NFTs. Fine. So that's actually how we ended up on Solana, was that in 2021, we were looking and we started playing around in the different NFT marketplaces to get a sense of, how do these work? And we realized, like, okay, well, if you're trying to buy a $75 bottle and the Ethereum gas fee is $250 at the time, like, so you're going to pay $325, but only get $75 worth of something that doesn't have that theoretical, no ceiling, like, oh, this is going to go to, $1 million because it's an NFT of a cow. And it's like, no, this is a real product. There's like real intrinsic value. So you need to reduce latency, but you also really need to reduce cost. So we settled on Solana, but then all of the earliest marketplaces, because originally we were like, great, we'll just use some existing NFT marketplace infrastructure. We'll focus on building the vaults and the physical operations. Everything was priced and sold. And so we're like, okay, that doesn't work, especially back in 2021, because, it was on its way straight up. So you had this crazy volatility. So it's like, great. So I list the bottle today at one SOL, and SOL is $65. And then tomorrow SOL's at $120. So no one's going to buy my bottle anymore because I have to constantly sit there and reprice it. So the infrastructure that enabled us to actually build this was like, we had all the building blocks, but we had to actually say, how do we abstract this away? How do we make it so that you don't need to remember a 24-word seed phrase? You don't need, to set up a phantom wallet. And if you lose access, you lose your money. Because so many of our customers and our target audience are not necessarily super technologically savvy, and definitely not necessarily, crypto knowledgeable. So we needed to say, we can bring them to the benefits and the efficiencies of crypto, but we have to do it in a way where we're meeting them where they are.
My friends, big news. Blockworks is hosting Permissionless 3 in Salt Lake City this year, so we're heading west for 3 days starting October 9th. Permissionless is our industry's premier DeFi event that brings together crypto natives from all over the globe. I've personally been the last 2 years and can honestly say that the attendees are incredible. It's people who actually care about crypto. We'll also have more than 200 industry titans speaking at the event, and this includes builders like Lucas Bruder from Judo Labs and Brian Pellegrino from Layer Zero, or investors like Kyle Samani and Joe McCann, and even elected officials like Representative Tom Emmer, who is fighting the good fight in Washington. And it's narrative season, so we're going to be covering the 7 hottest themes in crypto. This includes things like modularity and restaking, or Bitcoin and L2s, and even AI and crypto. The goal is to keep you up to speed on major developments in the industry. Ticket prices will be structurally increasing over time, so get your ticket today. For my Lightspeed family, I got you. We're going to use code Lightspeed10 in all caps, no space, for 10% off your ticket. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at Permissionless 3, and let's get back to the show. This is a really compelling story for me. We've been it feels like the last few episodes we've done on Lightspeed, something comes up in the episode where like, how do you get a wallet experience that doesn't feel like you're using a wallet for that exact reason you just said? And I've always been like pushing this idea of having like the idea of self custody is huge, and I love the optionality that crypto provides because you can do that, but it shouldn't be like forced upon everybody. And there should be like this like light mode, if you will, where there is some more like custody aspect. How do you guys approach the wallet? And I kind of want you to expand on that because I was playing around on the site last night, and like you can't really tell it has anything to do with blockchain, which is really really cool.
Yeah, so that's actually, and I love that you called it light mode because that's actually a big thing for us. Is like our whole website now is actually in light mode. We totally revamped it, and we are going to add in the future what I'll call like a degen mode, which is where you can connect your Phantom wallet, your external, and really do your own self custody. But the goal right now is again to help people who want to buy, collect, trade, find wines and spirits to be able to do that in the same way that they do now. So right now we use Magic as our login provider, but we're looking at different systems. But the idea is basically you log in with your email. That's the first step. So you're logging into the platform in the same way that people are very familiar with almost any platform now online. You have to use an email to log in. The advantage is they don't even need to remember a password, which again becomes very advantageous for some of our older users. We have users on our platform who are well into their 80s because they're whiskey enthusiasts, but they're not necessarily interested in learning about the future of the financial ecosystem and how they're going to change the world. Like they just want to buy their whiskey. So they log in using an email, their email, which spins up a wallet on the back end. We also then integrate with a company called CoinFlow, which enables for payments to be done. So you can either fund your account. You can actually fund your account through there, get USDC into your wallet, put money in through a ACH or a wire transfer or a bank transfer. But most of our early users, just when they find a bottle that they want, they just click checkout and they pay with their credit card. They can pay with Apple Pay or Google Pay. And so for them, it's like a really seamless e-commerce transaction. It's something that they're very familiar with. It shows up in their account. Once they buy it, the bottle then, the token transfers on the back end to them. It's just, hey, this is now in your account. And they see it over there. They see the bottle history. They see the pricing history, all the information about it. And then they can click and they can redeem it and have it shipped to them, or they can relist it on the marketplace. But those are like the core features, is like, how do you get someone to buy and sell their whiskey? That's what we needed to do. And then we're like, okay, now we can start to work with the users who are like, hey, I noticed that you have a checkout with crypto option. Like, what does that look like? How do I do that? And so those people who are even curious or want to know that, great, we can work with them. Because to be honest, there's a lot of stigma around, crypto in general. There are a lot of people still who don't fully understand what it means. To them, it still means scam. And so if they were to see front and center, like, here's your bottle token and your crypto and your this, they're like, I'm not touching this. But it's like, no, you're buying a real bottle. Like that bottle you see, it's not just a picture. Like if you click into any of the individual bottles listed on the marketplace, like you can do a full 360 degree like turnarounds. Like we scan each individual bottle. So even the quote unquote NFT is not here's a stock image. This is the specific exact bottle that you're buying. So if there's a tear in the label, if there's a stain on it, if there's that's the bottle you're buying. So if you don't like the way it looks, if you want it like a different grade or a different quality, find another one on the marketplace that fits like what you're looking for, which is an improvement over just the typical even liquor store experience now. Because for collectors who go onto liquor store websites, it's always a stock image. Like here's the bottle you're getting, and then you get it, and it's like, well, it's not in perfect condition. It's not exactly the one that they showed. It's last year's release, not this year's release. So we got really, really, really technical with that.
I'm getting fired up. Now I want to go buy a bottle. All right, let's actually zoom in on this a little bit more then. So I want to talk about the user flow. I really like your focus of even starting your product in light mode. I find that really, really compelling because that's your core user base today. Like you need to build a product for people that don't care about crypto. So abstract it all away. That is something we do not see often enough. And broadly, this is just a really cool business that is building on chain because it's improving a functionality that they need. So I want to dive into like what that functionality is, but let's first talk through the user flow. So I log in, I can like browse the marketplace, and then when I like buy a bottle, walk me through what happens and like what my options are once I buy this bottle, because I know it sits in a vault that your team runs, and then like, can I ship it to myself? Can I consume the bottle? Like, how does it work after I buy it?
Yeah. So ultimately, like our team is either already passionate whiskey and spirits enthusiasts, or very quickly becoming spirits and whiskey enthusiasts. And so, as much as these are collectibles, and as much as they are, to some people assets, they're also really, they're great whiskey. That's the goal. It's like we want people to be able to eventually drink this and find this. And some of them are, I think I have to check, but like we definitely have bottles in there from like pre-prohibition, like early 1900s bottles of bourbon that are still sealed, and like you want people to actually drink that and try that and enjoy that and experience that. Like it's not just supposed to sit in a museum. So you can go, once the bottle's in your account, you can redeem it. And redemption means like you can have it shipped to you, to basically to anywhere. Because we had one guy, for example, was going to a bachelor weekend and he bought a bottle and he wanted the bottle to meet them there because he's like, we're not checking bags. And we're like, no problem. Send us the address you're going to be. Bottle gets shipped out to them. They're then able to, drink and consume it and enjoy it. And so, dropping it early, we haven't rolled it out yet. But one of the things we're planning on building actually pretty soon is something called like proof of pour, which is if you redeem a bottle, we actually want to see that you, like, if you open it, you don't have to, but if you do open it, we actually want record of that, because one of the things I had mentioned to you earlier is like when the whiskey is consumed, it reduces the supply in the market. And so for a lot of these rare and interesting bottles, it's actually really beneficial to everyone to know that there's one less in circulation. So that's kind of the reward system, is like, hey, if you're drinking this, if you're sharing tasting notes in your review and like you're helping other consumers, like, so, hey, this was really worth it, or this was great, or hey, this was awful. Like there was one bottle that I was so excited to try, like also like a pre-prohibition. It was called the Golden Wedding. And we opened it up on December 5th last year. We hosted a big prohibition repeal party. So we actually held it in a speakeasy in New York. We opened like 10 or 20 bottles, like somewhere between of pre-prohibition whiskey. So whiskey that was distilled, before 1917, most of it, like just really cool stuff. And for a lot of people, there was their first time ever drinking something. So we opened up the Golden Wedding. I'm pouring it for people. They're all drinking it. They're like, wow, it's so interesting. It's, this. And I'm like, I tried, and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. Like this, like, it's rare and it's hard, but like this whiskey has either gone bad, or it was bad when they made it and it's just worse. It is awful. And so everyone else was like, oh, like, I'm so happy to hear that. Like, I just didn't want to seem like I didn't know what I was talking about. And I'm like, no. Like the goal of like anything which has like a subjectivity of it, like whiskey, is like, I mean, somebody may have liked the flavor of, like, I described it as like gym socks. Like it smelled like you opened like an old, it was just like vile in my
Incredible.
opinion. But like maybe that's somebody's flavor profile. So like if you write like, I love that musty smell of gym socks, like great, that's fantastic. But the point is then other people at least know, okay, this bottle smells like gym socks. Now, it might be that was a one-off, that particular bottle got corked, that like, got tainted over time. But it also could be that like that bottle in general, that production line, the corks that they used were bad. Like they didn't hold up over time. And so the more data we can aggregate about people writing these reviews and these notes, like the more of a complete picture you're able to build about these things, and then make accurate referrals, instead of when you go onto like a liquor store website right now and it's like, oh, okay, people who bought this bottle also bought this bottle, and it's like, great, it's a bottle of Jack Daniels, so they're recommending a bottle of Coca-Cola. It's like, okay, I get it, but like that's not because it's like has a similar flavor profile or you might enjoy this. It's because that's what they're buying together. We want to really get down into it and be like, this is what you like drinking, whether it's tequila, whether it's wine, whether it's whiskey, and then be able to make referrals based on other tasting notes, flavor profiles, the things that you actually like about it. So that builds off of that.
So you have a super dedicated community, I imagine, and fairly tight knit in such like a niche passion. I think you tend to see that as communities form in anything really, and that would lead me to believe that there's probably like some social elements here and like encouraging people to participate in something like proof of pour. But I'm curious if there's anything deeper that you guys are trying to work on to encourage participation in this mechanism.
Yeah, so we haven't rolled out the proof of pour at all. What's great about the whiskey community is, as opposed to certain types of gamification that's going on, like in blockchain, like you need to use it as a referral to convince other people to participate, like in your walking games and your competitions. Like most people, can't say everyone, most people like to drink with other people. It's such an inherently social activity. And so when I get a new bottle, like the first thing I do before I even try it to like write tasting notes or whatever is like I text a bunch of friends and I'm like, hey, do you want to come over? I just got something. Do you want to try this? Because like so much of it is like not just, oh, what do I think of it? But it's like, what do you think of it? Do you think it's good? Do you like it? Not because your opinion is going to shape my opinion, but because they then text me when they get a new bottle. Like there's something so exciting about it. So So part of it is like inherently just the nature of how people consume wines and spirits is like in this social setting. So we don't have to necessarily um, like try and encourage that behavior. Although, we obviously do. It's always better to drink with friends, in my opinion. But the one side of it now that we are looking into is we're trying to find the balance between creating social community and like not having to get involved in like Discord, like, channels and content moderation. Because what's cool about the whiskey community is that it's so decentralized already. Like, it's not like there's like, oh, we all go to one place or one, like every block has a bar, every place has their crowd, every person has their own little group of people that they drink with. And so it's more about trying to find opportunities where we can eventually bring people together from like it's like centralize these decentralized communities and actually say like, hey, we're going to do an activity or an event, or we're doing a special limited edition Baxus release, and we're going to be doing meetups in these 5 or 6 cities where you can come and try the whiskey for free. So we actually want to do more of that side of it, of like bringing people together. But we haven't developed any specific thing within to the protocol yet, because we're, like I said, there's so much building that we have to do, and the good part is that there are so many communities that are already doing it. Like, we just say we reach out to someone who's kind of like a tastemaker, like not even an influencer, but somebody who's like, yeah, I have a little local group, and we buy bottles together and we share them. And we're like, great. And we'll just randomly, literally airdrop him a bottle to his wallet, his account. He then redeems it. And then him and his friends come to get together. They drink it. They're all writing reviews and telling people what they think of it. And like, that's a way to also like bring awareness. So brands now are kind of leveraging like our platform in the same way, where it's like, we want to reach a new audience. And these are people who have never tried our product, or we don't think have. And then they get airdropped a bottle, they drink it with their friends. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, can I find this by me? Is this in a liquor store near me? Like, it's not just about the super rare things. It's about the stuff that like, hey, what can I find on my liquor store shelves?
That's a really cool angle as well, is like airdropping these RWA assets and being able to redeem them for the physical item is really unique, honestly. I think that was something that was always promised. Like, maybe if you like rewind a couple of years ago, the hype of last bull market was precisely something like this, where you could actually redeem the asset behind the on-chain NFT. And I guess I want to dive a little deeper on your actual marketplace. So, like every marketplace, there's supply and demand. Does your history and being involved in the whiskey trading business play a pretty significant impact here on the supply side? Because the demand side, I can kind of see, there's already a community of whiskey drinkers out there. There's already like a passionate group of people, and you as the product, it's kind of like your job to go rope people in, get them comfortable with your product and why, and show them the features and why they're going to end up loving it and become power users. But on the supply side, I'm a little bit more in the dark on like what that looks like. So can you shed some light on like what the supply side of rare whiskeys and spirits looks like?
Yeah, so most of the transactions now take place either through like gray market Facebook groups, or they're either like gray market Facebook groups or on auction houses. And auctions are the issue with auctions, in the same way of like kind of NFTs in general, is that they're an attention game. So the auctions that have the most eyeballs on them are going to end up driving up the most bids. So you might have a bottle that 2 identical bottles on 2 different auction places, on 2 different auction houses, and like one of them will go for like thousands of dollars more than the other. Identical whiskey, like exact same thing, because one of them just has more people bidding on it than the other one. And so as a consumer, like that was my game, was like arbitraging. I'm like, I'm going to go and I'm going to find the really, really like, obscure auction sites in the middle of nowhere and set up, my Google browser to translate foreign languages so I can just buy up bottles that are not getting the attention that they deserve, and like snagging them at good prices. But it also then again, so that's how these things typically work. So coming out of this space, like you mentioned, was a huge benefit for us. Like, I knew, having run the brokerage and having worked at traded, I knew some of the biggest collectors in the world. And so going to them and basically saying like, hey, we're going to provide you real-time data and analytics on your bottles. So like the actual values of your bottles as they're trading across all of these different auction houses and marketplaces and groups. Like, we have the largest historical data set of whiskey prices, whether they're private groups, whether they're private transactions, whether they're auctions. All of that information is there, and like we make that available so you could see what you should be buying at, what you should be listing at. And again, eventually we'll make that even more robust, the kind of like the depth, the volume, how many of these things, the frequency. But for now, we're just giving you prices, which even that alone is like completely novel to this world, where like people are not getting that type of insight and data. And so they're trying to Google it against like, okay, well, I see that this bottle, the only websites I could find it on, they're charging $1,500. And I'm like, right, but if $1,500 were a great price, they would have all been bought already from these websites. So it's the real market price might be 900, 1,000. You see it at 1,200 at an auction. You're like, I'm getting a steal because it's not, 1,500 like on the website. But even beyond that, the auction houses all have really, really, really high buyer's premiums. They make their money specifically, like their job is to just churn, bring it in, sell, and churn. So they're taking money from the seller and from the buyer. And the reason for that is because they're trying to get as many bottles in and then as many bottles out within a short period of time. So when you ship them a bottle, it might take, you send all of your bottles to the auction house. It'll take them a couple of weeks to get them all photographed, ready for the auction. The auction runs over the course of a week, let's say, closes on the final night. And then their job now is to go and collect all the money from people, because you bid without, you're not putting your money up, you're just bidding. And so they have to then collect all the money so that they can pay out the sellers. They have to then ship all the bottles out, and then they have to go and hunt a brand new supply to run their next auction. So they have a really high overhead of this constant churn. And so our model was, well, we're just going to take these things into the vault the first time. We're going to scan them and authenticate them so that we have them already. And then that bottle now, because of the benefit of blockchain and the instantaneity of the settlement of the USDC, those bottles now will settle in real time. So like you've sold a bottle, the money's in your account. If you want to go buy a bottle right now, you can go roll it over and go buy another bottle. It's not, you have to wait 2 to 3 weeks until we collect the money from the guy who bought the bottle from you so that you can go and buy a bottle at our next auction. And that creates even more volume just because you've increased the velocity of the trading, because you have so much more speed and the ability to get the money in and out. Our initial growth hack, and we actually now are in the process of, we're about to finish our second vault because we outgrew our first one much faster than we thought we would. There's been a ton of this supply side, which we were, hoping and anticipating, but not realizing how much we'd be able to do, because people store their wine in third-party warehouses like all the time. Like most wine is stored in third-party warehouses, but whiskey and spirits is relatively not like new, that concept of storing them somewhere else. So we were expecting it'd be a lot of hand-holding and really trying to explain to people what the idea is and why. A couple of it was like I said, I had a really big clientele who had, individuals who had hundreds of bottles a piece. So for them, it was like, great. But the joke that we always make, but it's true, is we actually, instead of going to the collectors, I actually went to most of the collectors I know. I went to their spouses, and I was like, so, those bottles that are like taking up your entire living room? And they're like, get them the hell out of here. And I knew that would work because my wife, like over COVID, my living room, like literally I had like strategic like gaps in the floor between the bottles so you could hop to the Peloton. Like you could not walk across the floor. There were so many bottles that I had accumulated. And so it was like, okay, if my wife is as upset about the lack of space in our apartment as she is, like, I'm sure some of the other people over here, and they were like, hey, this is, the storage is free, the insurance is free, like send it out of here, you'll get it, you'll be able to track it, and you'll be able to sell them faster. You'll have access to real-time liquidity in markets. So that actually is what we noticed, was that so many people were excited about the idea that like, am I going to sell this bottle? I don't know. But if all of a sudden an offer comes in and it's like, if I click accept on this offer, like if somebody puts a bid in and I'm like, yes, the money's in my account instantly, like that type of instant gratification and the idea of, would I have sold it? I'm not sure, but if I could do it instantly and somebody's like, here's the cash, then yes. And like that's creating also that more velocity of trading. More people are willing to accept an offer because they don't have to deal with it. It's not like, well, some of these guys, it's like, oh, I'm at my house in Florida. The bottle's in my apartment in New York. I have to fly back and then ship it and then deal with shipping it. Because most people we need liquor licenses to trade. Most people can't even ship liquor across state lines. Like there's all these rules and regulations. So when you get through kind of all of those different areas where like, the supply side actually took off much faster than we were expecting. So that's been a big part of like our raise, is like we have physical infrastructure. We're like planning already, like where are we building our next vaults? Like we've got demand now, not just in the US, but like the UK, Europe, Asia. Like, so where are we putting vaults so that we can keep the bottles as close as possible to their point of origin so that they're not traveling until the point when they're being redeemed?
You heard it here first, folks. The new GTM strategy is officially go to the spouse and give them exactly what they want. I love that as somebody recently married. You also mentioned instant settlement there, which is fascinating. Again, one of these things that was like long heralded as a core feature or a benefit of blockchain is instant settlement. I think the financialized RWAs, things like treasuries or fund shares, that's always been a perk of something like that. Or even recently, we had Stripe announce that they're bringing some of their payment infrastructure, enabling the on-chain component there. Again, even with the world of AI rising around us, two AI agents like inherently need instant settlement because there will be no trust between them if they were to transact with like a payment or even like micropayments. So it's really, really interesting to hear you as a business owner being like, hey, instant settlement improves the quality of what we can offer. And the other thing you mentioned there I thought was fascinating was the sort of like the data of the marketplaces. I'd imagine you're doing like a lot of manual work, collecting all of this data, sourcing it, creating the database and publishing it, which is in contrast to kind of how it can potentially be going forward if Baxus becomes sort of this canonical marketplace because everything's on chain. Do you think about the aspect of like, hey, in the world where all of this data is on chain, it's free and open to access to anyone, and we can like create this great tool to interact with it. Have you ever like looked at that side of the market?
Yeah, I mean that's why we don't charge for the data. Like there are other companies that like do the same thing we do, but because that's their business model is like giving people whiskey pricing data, so they charge you a subscription to access it, and you can search a certain number of bottles or track a certain number of bottles. But for us, we're like, our model is to get more people trading, and the more people trading, they trade more when they have better information and they feel more comfortable and confident with what they're doing. So our goal very much so is like we have two different color data points on every bottle if it's on our marketplace, which is the let's say what I'll call like traditional trad market trading, like this is what it's trading for at auctions, and then there's another color dot on the graph that shows you like if that bottle has sold on Baxus, what the price is over there. So you're actually able to track kind of those the differences over there. Yeah, and our goal is for that to scale up, is that eventually so much of this trading is taking place either on our marketplace or on other on-chain marketplaces, and so the aggregation of that data becomes even easier.
Awesome. And I want to kind of, I guess, change tune here and jam on the crypto side of things as well. And so I think you alluded to this earlier, but it sounds like you guys have kind of built your own like NFT marketplace infrastructure. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, I love that approach. And I guess one of my other questions was like, why Solana? You kind of touched on like the fees side of this, but we look out today, there's a lot of low fee chains at this point, and also this different idea where basically you build your own blockchain and use that as your own like not private infrastructure, still open and accessible, but like your own app chain. You can kind of avoid this noisy neighbor problem of someone else doing things that you like aren't your core business on chain and giving you different troubles, whether that be like Solana's recent bout with congestion or localized fee markets not really working properly and creating higher fees for everybody. I'm just curious if that is ever something that you guys have thought about internally. Like, hey, if we go build our own app chain, maybe we can have some extra benefits, or I'll leave it there.
So the reason we initially built on Solana was the low fees, but it was more than just that the fees were low. It's the fact the fees were low, not just for our users, but because we actually pay all the gas. Our users don't know what gas is. Like they don't interact with it. They don't see it. And that was important to us, was that like we can, literally that we can have the money to afford to be able to pay the listing fees and the transfer fees, and et cetera. Because again, if you're paying with a credit card and you're already paying the 3% credit card fee, and then it's like, oh, by the way, there's like 1/18 of a penny is being charged to you every time you list something. They'll be like, what the hell is this? Like they don't understand that. They're used to SQL databases where even though they're technically as a data retrieval and like publishing cost, like they never see that. That's part of the business model. So that's why we originally built on Solana was the speed as well. Was we wanted speed and we wanted low fee markets. The congestion has been tough. Like, it's gotten better, and it's going to hopefully continue to get better. 3, maybe 5% by this morning of the validators have all updated to 1.18. Like we're hoping and continuing to see like improvements, which is really great. And like, that's for us has been a big thing, but our business is wines and spirits. It's not crypto. Like there is so much else that we want to be able to build. And so in reality, what I would prefer happen over the future is like, our infrastructure, somebody go and say like, okay, we're going to build out like we're built on Solana, but in theory, there's nothing stopping someone if they're like, hey, I think that I can get more liquidity on these same assets on Ethereum. And so they build their own version of a bridge, to something like that's the beauty of building on blockchain and building like on a totally like permissionless structure, was that like, if you want to buy 10 assets on Baxus and then bundle them or wrap them and try and publish them elsewhere and sell them there and go back and forth and do whatever. And then as long as we only recognize our issued token. So as long as those tokens still exist and that's linked somehow intrinsically, like go for it. But at the same time, there's so much risk in building your own chains and building your own app chains and the exploits and the infrastructure and everything that you have to build over there, that it would basically, I mean, the way that I view it is when most of these companies are doing it, it's because it's a lot easier to raise if you're announcing that you're building your own L2 or L3 or whatever it is. Like, oh, great, because there's some huge token allocation in the future. And so they get so caught up in it. And I'm like, great, but what's anyone actually building on your chain? Like, what is the value of it? Like, that was one thing that was we were very lucky about early on, was, again, like, we set out with this clear vision of like, we have a product and we have a user base, and the technology of how we get there doesn't matter to our users so long as they're able to do what they want. Like, I don't care if you host your video streaming service on Azure or on Amazon or on Google Cloud. Like, can I press a button and watch a movie? Like, great, then it works. I don't care how you are doing it. That's your job to figure out, and that's been a big part. What's cool, though, is that you do have people who are like, for certain types of infrastructure products, who are like, nerds who are like, oh, I actually do care about, like, if let's talk about cars, for example. Like, if your car is built on this type of chassis or engine, because then I can modify it and make my own improvements. And so what was cool about building on a public blockchain like Solana was that, like, there's going to be features and things that are built out in the future that, like, we don't have to build. Like, we were talking about community before. Like, right now, the community is very much so that we're interacting with as the wine and spirits community. But there will be there is a large contingency within the blockchain community of people who are also into wine and spirits, who are going to figure out how to spin things out on top of our infrastructure. And so it doesn't make sense, and it's not really in our interest right now to go and focus on building our own chain, because great, that's another several years of development and, like, fundraising, and to go and so that we can go and do the exact same thing that we're doing now. Yes, it would make certain things a little bit more convenient. It would mean that we don't have to deal with congestion as much. But I mean, I log on to Netflix sometimes and it says, we're so sorry, there's an AWS shortage, outage. Like, Netflix is not going and building its own entire cloud system providers because they're like, sometimes AWS goes down. Like, it doesn't make sense for them. And so that's kind of been like our focus on it. What is cool though is in that same idea, and why we built it on chain, and again, not on our own, is because there's a lot of, like, the DeFi protocols are awesome. Like, we have already, like, we work with a company called Bridge Split. And so they've, like, set up infrastructure for on-chain lending. And so we've already, like, there have been over $500,000 worth of loans originated against people's bottles and barrels, like actual casks of whiskey that are being stored, because you have proof of the asset is in our vault. You can see the actual data and all of that transmission. And so the toughest part is finding a lender in the DeFi space who also understands the benefits or, like, the values. And so we publish the pricing data. We give it, again, right now we share it with BridgeSplit, but the idea is, like, eventually you'll get a data feed through. Like, we'll basically be this oracle for these prices so that you can go and pump it into your DeFi platform and say, like, hey, you could earn, I don't even know what are the 900% yield on your USDC if you're lending against this token that's a stable coin backed by the amount of rainfall in Nevada. Like, I don't know, whatever these things that they come up with, but, like, or you could lend against a hard asset at a 50%, 60% LTV with, like, a 10 to 15% return, which is sure not, the bountiful promises of, like, these, 300%, annual returns. But at the same time, like, if somebody defaults over there, the asset underlying it, the actual thing that they default, and what you get is a real bottle or a real barrel of whiskey with an intrinsic value that can immediately be sold on a marketplace at market value. There's actual, like, liquidity in it, or redeemed. Like, we have some of our lenders are actually, that's not true. All of the lenders who have issued loans right now have said, I hope that these people default. Like, they are literally hoping that they end up with the underlying asset, because it means that they're buying their favorite bottles of whiskey at 50 cents on the dollar. And so they're like, that's a bargain, because they're actually, the lenders now are knowledgeable about the whiskey side. We have to teach them DeFi. They understand wait, I can lend money against a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle for half of what it's worth. And if the guy pays me back, I make 12% on my money. And if the guy doesn't pay me back, I get a bottle of Pappy for 50 cents on the dollar. Like, he's like, this is amazing. Like, I'll give me as many loans as I can get. So it creates, like, more stability. And that, then again, our goal there is to funnel that upstream. It's not just with the private collectors, but then that actually enters into real commerce, where now distilleries, brands, people that have inventory can now finance against their inventory, because it's held, in this case, by a third party. So it's trusted, real time what the market value is. So you can, assess the collateral, what the volatility is, how much volume is traded, and start to actually make more capital efficiency. Because that's one of the biggest issues now for, like, new distilleries that are starting up. Whiskey in particular, there's a reason why there's so much gin and vodka that whiskey distilleries make when they first start. And it's because gin and vodka don't have to be aged. So you distill it the same way you're about to make whiskey, you run it a couple extra times for vodka, et cetera. But then you can bottle it and sell it. Whereas opposed to whiskey, where, like, in order to make a 12-year-old bourbon, you need 12 years. Like you can't speed that up. You need it to sit inside of a barrel for 12 years. So like they need capital, operating capital throughout the course of those 12 years. But there's a serious appreciation curve for how that whiskey goes up in value. And so the ability for a distillery or a brand to now borrow capital from even its fans, like, hey, I'm a huge fan of your brand. Like, sure, I'm going to put some money into debt by issuing it against these barrels. So in the event that they don't pay me back, I just bought, a barrel of whiskey for 1/10 of its cost of what it'll be in 10, 12 years. And I don't mind waiting on it. So you're creating a lot more capital efficiency and like really new ways of organizing and aggregating capital in a way that genuinely is only possible on blockchain. And that's why it's important to not try and focus on building our own app chain, because then it's like, okay, great. How do we go and attract all of this liquidity now into the sides of the market that we want to build when we just want to focus on building infrastructure within the wine and spirit space? Let somebody else come and say, great, I'm going to go raise a fund and I'm going to put money together and go and, deploy it over there.
You just made an army of excellent points about why building your own infra presents different challenges. There is the other side of that where there are benefits, but it's not your core business, and you want to spend time building the best wine and spirits marketplace. And so that's really, really interesting. And even the composability side there, I didn't know that there's already a DeFi ecosystem starting to pop around the NFTs of these assets that you guys are creating. That is really interesting. And even the last point there, have you gotten any interest on some of these distilleries being like, hey, we would love to get this OpEx on a loan there? Has that becoming, I'm sure that's kind of like a longer term play, but I'm curious if you've seen any traction out of the gates. And also on that same vein, what does that look like today? Like, do banks provide working capital in that context? I'd imagine some do, but I don't know.
So from the top, so we actually just hired a head of institutional at Baxus to come and specifically lead this, because we've seen already a ton of demand from brands and new distilleries and again, brands who don't have distilleries but buy whiskey so that they can bottle it under their own labels. And so they also need loans and operating capital, while they're waiting for their inventory to sell out. So we've had a ton of demand, which is what's leading us to actually go and talk to some people about setting up those funds to be able to deploy the capital. Up until now, there are a few banks, not many, but a few banks that provide this. But one thing that a lot of people don't know, and this was actually, when Silicon Valley Bank had the whole blow up over there, everyone was like, oh, the poor startups, right? But obviously it was terrifying for a lot of people, but the startups were like, most of them, they called their investors were like, okay, we're going to spot you your payroll for the next 2 weeks until it comes back on. We don't know. And thankfully, got resolved. But what people don't realize is Silicon Valley Bank didn't start as a tech bank. It started as a wine bank. They bank almost all of the wineries in Napa and Sonoma because that's where they were based and that's who they were. So they actually understood the business of underwriting wineries and what their inventory is worth and what the grapes and the vineyards are worth and how much they can lend them so that they can against the bottles, because wine gets bottled and then aged at the winery before it's actually released into the market for a few years. So what the value of that is. And the issue was that the bank that went and bought them out of North Carolina is a railroad bank. They don't know anything about wine. And so you start to have now this disconnect between okay, there aren't that many banks that understand the nuances of wine and fewer that understand the nuances of whiskey and spirits. There are a couple of them, but they're very, very localized. You need to know them. You need to, get in with them. You need to be geographically based in their area. So if, let's say, one of the biggest ones is in Kentucky, great. But if you're running a distillery out in, Oregon or, New York or Pennsylvania, it's a whole different market, getting into the right bankers over there. And so what ends up happening is you end up with a lot of hedge funds and private equity that provide the capital, but with fixed guaranteed buyouts, because the idea is they're we will give you the operating capital to build your distillery and to produce your first, your whiskey. But we're going to effectively buy your whiskey. Let's say it costs, I'm just throwing a number, but let's say it costs $1,000 per barrel. They're we're going to buy every single one of your barrels at $1,000. But when you release it in 6 years as a 6-year-old bourbon, you're going to pay us back $6,000 a barrel. And so they're making, it's great for them. They're making, 6x their money over the 6 years over there. They've got it guaranteed. And for the distillery, it's still theoretically possible because you get, again, I'm using some loose numbers here, but just you get about 200 bottles per barrel. So if you're getting 200 bottles out of it, you're okay, great. So it's going to cost me $30 per bottle to buy it back, which is why you start seeing the craft prices. All these craft whiskeys are $75, $80, $90 on a shelf, because then the distillery sells it to a distributor who sells it to a liquor store. Everyone's adding their markup. So by the time it hits the consumer, it's a $90 product. When in reality, if that distillery could be paying 10, even 20% per year over the course of those 6 years, right? Like on those, like they'd have paid at the end of it $2,000 for that barrel instead of $6,000. And so their cost is now $10 a bottle instead of $30 a bottle. It creates a totally different, a totally different like economic play where then they can bring their prices down, which means that they can reach new consumers who are being priced out because of that. And so again, you're creating a much more efficient way, which then prevents these kinds of booms and busts that like whiskey and wine industries have had over time, because whiskey got really hot. Bourbon was the hottest thing. And so all of this money started pouring in and investing in all these distilleries. And now all of a sudden it's like, wait, there's nobody to buy our $125 bourbon. And it's like, right, yeah, because it's all right. It's not phenomenal. It's not spectacular. But, Heaven Hill can produce at such a scale for so much less money that like they can still charge $45 for their 7-year-old bottled and bond, straight incredible product. And you can't compete with that because your capital is just not as efficient.
Yeah, that's fascinating because, in theory, you open up this market to more participants because it's easier to access as being a lender. In theory, again, like that makes a ton of sense why the cost of capital then falls for the distilleries. You still got to prove that in practice, but we've kind of seen inklings of similar things happen in DeFi. So it's no doubt that can definitely roll into this market as well. The other interesting integration I think you guys have is working with Helium for your sensors within your vaults. Talk to us a bit about that integration, kind of how that came to be, because it's a pretty interesting backstory there. Talk about the benefit that these sensors provide.
Yeah, so our whole thing was, again, like we're trying to build for like the worst case scenario. Like, well, great, the guys who sent us their bottles initially, they know us, they trusted us, they saw the vaults, they're like, great, this is fine. But we're like, but over time, we want people to know that like the bottle that we've scanned is still there, like that it's really there. Because again, that's the whole thing with custody, is like you need to, verification. So audits and cameras and having people come in. But what we realized was we had this vision for like a proof of presence, like doing some sort of proof of presence. And so we started to play around with like RFIDs and sensors and gateways. And the day actually that Helium was migrating to Solana, they were in the Solana offices in Empire DAO at the time in New York City. And we were upstairs, and whenever there was a party of any sort, like somebody would say like, hey, do you want to do the alcohol for the party? And we're like, sure. They're like, you're an alcohol protocol on Solana. Like, bring alcohol. We're like, no problem. So we actually ended up meeting Scott Siegel and Joey Hiller. And like, I had no idea, like we didn't know what Helium was. So we were like talking to them and we're like, yeah, this is what we're doing. And we have this idea. And we're like, we want to work with sensors. And they're like, do you know what Helium is? And I'm like, no, I have no idea what Helium is. And so they're like, yeah, it's this LoRaWAN network, this whole radio. Like they explained like what Helium is. And I literally run up 2 flights of stairs and I grab Carrie and I'm like, Carrie, you have to come meet these people. And so she jumps into it, sits down with Joey and like really digs into how Helium works and how it transmits data and how the data packets work. And, overchain with the signatures, like verifying like the actual, those signature stamps. And so we're like, wait a second, like this works for what we're trying to do. So immediately we went and we bought some, like a miner, and we bought some IoT sensors and things. And we started to tracking like the temperature, humidity, and like we tag each bottle in the vault with like a little RFID, and to actually verify and ping that like the bottles are in the vaults where they're supposed to be, and like the temperature and humidity. So now one of the other issues, and it's not as relevant for whiskey, like as far as like that perfect temperature and humidity, like as long as it's in a dark, cool place, you're okay. But for wine, which is super temperamental, like you need to be really, really specific on that. And one of the issues with third-party warehousing is they might say like, yeah, we keep it temperature controlled, and they may actually do it, but like you don't know if they have a blackout, you don't know if they have a power outage, you don't know how long, like if something was sitting somewhere or wasn't supposed to. And so the ability to start to get like down at the individual bottle level to like track the temperature and humidity and conditions and like the presence of like verification that it's in the vault where it's supposed to be is like tremendous. And so we started to play around with the technology. We ended up developing a couple of patents now that we're now rolling out to distilleries, because we realize the exact same technology that we're using to prove that a bottle is in our vault can be applied to a barrel that is aging in a distillery. And so they can measure, because the distillery, they store them in Kentucky, let's say in rick houses that are 6-7 stories high. And so the temperature and humidity is different at literally every level of the rick house. If it's 3 barrels in versus the one that's all the way at the front, if it's facing sunrise or sunset or whatever. And so that has a huge, like, temperature fluctuations are one of the biggest things that has an impact on the final product, like the flavor and the alcohol level of whiskey. And so the ability for them to granularly measure and keep track of how each barrel is like interacting with the climate in real time, and then to use that data to eventually, like right now, feed it into models, like especially with the advances of AI, to say like, okay, we've pulled these random barrels. This is the color of it. They all went in with the same on the same day, using the same like wood from the same cooperage. But this one is, higher ABV. This one, they can start to like actually customize the maturation periods, those 6 years, 10 years, 12 years while they're waiting. They can start to get really granular for like where they should be moving barrels to create certain flavor profiles or certain types of things that they want. And then on top of it, most distilleries, like the most advanced distilleries, are using barcodes to keep track of their barrels. So you may have a distillery with 3 to 4 million barrels, and they need to manually send somebody in to scan a barcode to like know where it is in the warehouse or which warehouse it's in. And so the least technologically advanced ones are sending people in twice a year with like, I kid you not, like a clipboard and paper and pen, and they're calling out like 123 is on, A1, and 127 is over here, and that one's are. And so like the ability for them to like be, the master blender or the master distiller or the owner to be sitting like on a beach somewhere and log onto his phone and see in his dashboard like where all the barrels are, what the temperatures and the humidities are, what the cycle is, and be like, okay, it's been really cold these past few weeks, and so like let's do some rotation. Let's move the barrels from the 6th floor down to the 1st floor. Let's do some like unheard of in the industry. And so it was kind of like a byproduct of what we were already building. And the most amazing part about it is that because we built over Helium and the way that Helium works, almost all these distilleries and these warehouses are in really rural areas with no cell phone connectivity, with no ability to transmit data. So otherwise they'd figure it out. They'd put on 5G, they'd slap SIM chips and everything. Now, like when we told them, we're like, hey, we can do this, and they didn't believe us, because they're like, what are you talking about? Like there's no cell phone service. We're like, no, it's fine. Like we've got it. And so like Carrie went down with Rich on our team and like set up like, the miners, and they did the extenders, and they were able to set up, and not only that, like provide now connectivity and Wi-Fi into these areas that didn't have it and transmit. Like it's like magic to them. They're literally like, it's blown. Like we have seen, and I kid you not, we have seen grown men actually cry tears of joy when like they saw the technology work, because they're like, you don't know how many hours, like man hours and like days and weeks of our lives you've just saved us with like what you're transmitting to us, and like the ability for us to monitor this now on a computer screen the same way that almost every other business does.
People love to throw around the word like revolutionizing, but it really does feel like you're bringing a very long-standing industry sort of into this digital age, which is really, really cool to see. And it's really awesome to see kind of blockchain play a very relevant role here. It's kind of refreshing, to be honest. I feel like I'm in my jaded era with all of on-chain activity, and I'm like, man, we're never going to make it out of here. This has been the most refreshing conversation I've had in a very long time. So I appreciate you and what you guys are doing. But if we zoom out here for a second, what is the total addressable market of rare spirit and wine trading? Like, how do you put that in a more market sizing context?
So part of it is hard to contextualize, specifically because of the fact that you don't know what's sitting in people's basements every time they unearth a new bottle or the value of it. But it's estimated to be right now between $20 and $40 billion.
Wow.
And that's just the fine and rare. That's not even talking about how much whiskey is sitting inside of, like we said, the distilleries and those. That's talking about bottles. So when you start to get to the fact now that using the sensors that we use, you can now track an individual barrel. So now distilleries can borrow money against their barrels. They can start trading their barrels. So like we have distilleries now that are launching programs on Baxus where, Dan, we get together with a group of friends and we're like, we're going to buy our own barrel of bourbon, and we're going to like bottle it in 5 years or in 10 years, or, hey, we're going to buy one that's ready right now and we're going to bottle it. Blockworks is releasing their own special edition that they're going to send out or whatever it is. Like you can do that now all on chain. You can actually buy the barrel on chain. Like that scales it up. Like, I mean, by a factor that we have not yet been able to calculate, but we are going to see over the next few years of like bringing this type of liquidity and bringing more tradability to every element of the pipeline.
Awesome, man. This has been a fantastic conversation. I guess a closing question here. You mentioned you had an infinity number of features you guys really want to bring into the product. And when you look out over the next 6 to 12 months, like what are some really core things or key KPIs you want to see your company hit over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so our biggest thing right now is going to be our biggest feature is going to be bids, like I mentioned, giving people the ability to put in offers on bottles that are not there, so that people now know what the market offer is. Because then if you're in a liquor store and you go onto Baxus and see that a bottle has a bid of 1,200, but nobody's filled it, and you see the bottle for 600, you're like, great, buy it, send it in, like fill that order, like actually do it. So that's like our biggest thing is like creating standing order book data of like how much is somebody willing to pay like right now for this bottle so that you can create that type of liquidity. And a big thing also, a couple of months ago, we acquired an app called Booze App, which helps people keep track of like what they have at home on their bar, what they're drinking, what they're liking. And so really merging the Baxus and Booze App infrastructures together so that you have not just the web-based marketplace, but like an app where even if you're not looking to buy something on any given day, there's something to do. You can log in, you can scan a price, you can enter data. And so definitely on the app, I'd say there's a lot of cool things coming to the app side. And for us, mostly it's onboarding, not even to the marketplace, but that's why I love Booze App, is it's onboarding users into the ecosystem. Because Booze App, you don't have to, to come onto Baxus, you either are trying to buy something or sell something. There's an initial kind of financialization about what you're doing. There's something financial there. When you download Booze App, you're writing down if you liked a bottle that you tried at a bar. Like you're writing your own notes so that you know to buy it again later. You're adding a bottle to your wish list. You're keeping track of something that's at your house, whether it's open or closed. So like, and there's a lot that we're doing over there. And then, but I'll say like it's kind of the biggest underlying thing. It's going to be gamification. I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but we're building a bunch of really cool features that you can, for both the really whiskey passionate, but also people who know nothing about alcohol or spirits, but want to get involved and potentially, earn in that sense by like contributing information and data to the whiskey community. That's going to be our big push.
We love to hear it. We'll definitely be on the lookout for these again over the coming year. But thanks again for coming on. This has been a fantastic discussion. We'll put some links to you and the company in the show notes. But cheers, man. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. You too.